is the man who holds that title. He's also the first Italian commander of the International Space Station. He's been giving me an insight into what happens when a group of astronauts get together for a party.
The one that comes to mind is that celebrations within astronauts and their instructors that we would do right before leaving to space. Astronauts go into a quarantine before a mission. It's between 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and the quarantine is done in the middle of the desert in Kazakhstan, in a place called Baikonur, which is hundreds of miles from anything. And so it's hard to imagine a party there. But after 2 weeks in the middle of the desert, you kind of feel the need for a little bit of release. And it's usually really fun. I mean, it involves a lot of traditional Russian music or Russian pop music from the 80s. And I've grown to love it. It's the equivalent of our YMCA at a party, you know? So there is a song called American Boy by a group called Kombinacja. Two women, they sing this song about their dream of meeting an American boy who would whisk them out of Moscow to the United States to drive around in a car and have fun in a hotel. Imagine you're in the middle of the desert, getting ready to blast off into space, and then here comes this song from the 80s. This is a song that every Russian knows. You know, the moment it comes up, everybody starts singing and dancing. And I even learned the words, and it's a lot of fun. American boy, American joy, American boy for always. And then, of course, there is the Russian song that is connected to every launch, which is Zemlya в иллюминаторе, which means Earth from a spacecraft window. This song, you know, it's the theme song of a launch, kind of like feeling Rocky before going for a run. And everybody knows the words. No matter where you come from, Japan, Italy, France, US, you just know that song, and it's just awesome.
How does it go?
So I don't want to sing it because I don't want to ruin your interview forever. But the refrain goes, "And we dream not of the blast of the rocket in the cosmodrome. We dream not of the icy cold blackness of space, but what we dream of is the green grass back home."
So, August 2019, you were at the heart of a pretty historic party. What was it, and what was your role in it?
Oh gosh. Oh goodness. Well, that was definitely out of my comfort zone. So it all starts with a phone call. Somebody calls me and says, "Hey Luca, what would you think of learning how to use a DJ console and then doing a DJ set from space?" And at that moment, I didn't even know what a DJ set meant, because I'm not a discotheque kind of guy. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, but yes. The vision was to have this huge night party on a cruise ship, and there are going to be thousands of people from all over Europe and all over the world possibly, and that's when I'm going to do my live DJ set from space.
And it's not just anywhere as well, because this cruise ship is in Ibiza, which is party central.
It is, even though I've never been to now. My older brother, when we were teenagers, I think he went 2 or 3 times. It just wasn't my thing. I was more of a nerd as a teenager, still am.
And why was this such a big moment?
Well, there are some things that really catch people's imagination and attention, especially when something has never been done. And this had never been done. You just don't have astronauts playing music and sending it to the ground, and especially you don't have astronauts playing disco music or party music. And so I met with a DJ Leshuk from Germany.
Hallo, guten Abend.
He taught me how to mix songs and to create little effects and to do something fun. And that was it. We had a couple of hours to do that, and then I told Leshuk, the DJ said, hey, send me a list of songs that are popular right now, because I don't want to be playing a DJ set of the Beatles.
Or that amazing Russian duo that you listen to out in Kazakhstan.
You know, I should have. I should
You
have.
absolutely should have.
I should have, but no, I didn't want people to kind of have these huge question marks over their heads. So instead, he sent me a lot of songs, and I picked the ones that I liked the best. And I decided, okay, I'm going to try and improvise a DJ set based on these songs.
Did you get a DJ name before the set?
I have a Twitter handle, Astro_Luca, Astro Luca, which is not very original because all the astronauts use the same handle, Astro something. But it makes sense that Astro Luca would be my DJ name. But I didn't do any of that stuff like, this is Astro Luca in the house. I didn't do any of that. Maybe I should have.
Well, you did it now, and that's just as good. So you have your set list. You have your huge crowd of people waiting on this cruise ship in Ibiza. Can you describe where you were and what you could see as you were doing this?
Yeah, I couldn't see much. I think we were flying over the Atlantic Ocean at the time. I was isolated in Columbus. It's a science module on the International Space Station. It's a laboratory. So not quite a stage and not quite, a place for a party. So I had to bring the party into it.
All right, let's start this. Hello, everybody. Ciao. I am DJ Astro Luca today.
How did it go?
I'll tell you what, my biggest worry was that I was going to mess it up. That is an astronaut's greatest fear. I tried to mentally get myself in the idea, okay, I have thousands of people in front of me, even though I cannot see them, but they can see me and they can hear me. And then I decided that, hey, I'm not a dancer, but maybe I can go upside down, and I started floating around.
Let's see if you can do it going sideways like me.
Clap my hands, invite people to join me, and so I tried to use that feeling of, I know I'm silly and I'm completely feel like a fish out of water, but I'm giving it all I have just to have fun, just to do something different. And I thought people maybe caught on to that.
Is it something you think you'd do again?
Oh, wow. I'll tell you what, if I ever do something similar again, I would want to get a lot more experience than I had at the time.
Would you play a different set list next time?
I would pick my own list and definitely include the Russian music that you told me.
I will definitely tune in if you include the Russian music next time. Luca Parmitano, aka DJ Astro Luca, the first person to DJ from space. This is Outlook from the BBC World Service, taking you now to Trinidad, where for the first time in 49 years, their famous carnival has been cancelled. It's one of the biggest festivals in the Caribbean, and I know that there are some regular listeners from Trinidad, so if you're tuned in and feeling hard done by, we're going to relive one of Carnival's unique events, Juve Morning. The Rapso band, Tree Canal, have long played a prominent part, and they told Outlook's Nikki Paxman all about it.
There we go.
So, first of all, I've got to ask, what is Juve Morning?
Juve Morning is a pre-dawn ritual that initiates the carnival celebrations on the streets. The traffic lights are switched off from midnight. People naturally gravitate into the streets and people take over. And there's also that moment in the carnival where people strip down and get to a sort of base level, and it's full of spooky things.
The Juve is the new day. The French word, they open, the thing start, the bacchanal start. The moment when people really abandon everything and just release.
And what are the roots? What's the old tradition of Juve?
There's a line that you can draw in Trinidad Carnival. Prior to emancipation of the slaves, 1834, 1838, the carnival will consist of fetting. going from one plantation to the next, dressing up. And the slaves were involved because they had to prepare the food and prepare the dances and sing the songs and everything else. But post-emancipation, they formally enslaved people were able to now claim the streets. They were now able to claim their freedom and celebrate it in this new form.
So hence your lyric, we're going to reclaim the streets, reclaim Port of Spain.
Yes, we come to take back the crown. Yes, we come to take over town. Tell them they cannot come down. 10,000 black jab.
And then 10,000 black jabs. What's a black jab?
Black jab is a traditional carnival character, one of the first actually, because what happened is that the semi-emancipated slaves, they paid homage to their fellow slaves who were killed via being drowned in a hot boiling vat of molasses. So hence, jab molasses, molasses devil.
Because molasses is this thick syrup, thick black syrup that's made from hot sugar.
So legend has it, the particularly badly behaved slaves were thrown into these vats of molasses as an example to the other slaves to behave themselves.
So the tradition of Juve mourning, of smearing your body in something, mud or clay, or quite often black motor oil now, that represents the actual molasses, is it?
It's meant to.
There's something very basic and fundamental about going back to the earth, taking soil and rubbing it on your skin, and going out in the streets and not being recognized. There's something very, very liberating in that.
Because one of the things that started happening is that the Juve itself became a place where people started prettifying, they come with little Hawaiian skirts with a little smear on their cheeks and said they were playing Juve. So our intervention in Juve was a response to that. We wanted to reconnect to the root of it, the essence of it, to really get nasty again.
So the ritual starts at 4 in the morning. So the night before, you're up all night smearing yourself in. What did you actually smear yourselves in?
We had body paint, and then we had a mixture of charcoal and oil, coconut oil.
It's lovely.
Is it?
Yeah, in the moment.
And when the sun comes up and it's hot, is it not a little?
Feeling nice.
You don't feel the heat because there's so much spirits in your body that you don't feel that heat. In fact, it's glorious to feel the sun on your skin that hour in the morning.
That moment when the sun does come up is truly a magic moment. Because you start in the darkness and imagine you're covered in black, so everybody's kind of gloomy and it's shapeless and formless, but when the sun comes up, then you really get to see how nasty people are and how transformed people are.
Actually, when the sun actually starts to get hotter is when you're looking for more paint and more things to cover,
You wouldn't want it to wear off, would you?
Exactly.
Right, so what is raps?
Brother Resistance's definition, Rapso is the power of the word in the rhythm of the word.
It's the poetry of calypso and soca.
But it was something I think that was around in the 1960s and 70s.
Well, the song that's credited as being sort of first acknowledged Rapso recording is a song by a gentleman named Lancelot Lane, and it's a song called Blow Away. And he says, if a man wants to set false standards for you to follow, to he will say, blow away. You persist in like me head and like me bread. You live in there, will say, blow away. So that sense of him rapping on a beat with that call and response element, which is all fundamental, basic African. What happened is that when we came into it, we were the first sort of group to bring that group sound to rap. So I mean, 4 voices coming together with natural harmonies, and I think that's what set us apart.
So what about this name, Tree Canal, which is written with the number 3 and then the word canal?
A tree canal is a particular type of cutlass.
Cutlass.
Machete, yes.
So here comes a big machete.
1, 2, 3 grooves run along the blade to give the blade flexibility. So a tree canal is literally a machete. It's a cutlass used to clear any ground or used to ward off enemies or danger or a bandit or anything. You pull out
Forest strength knife, basically, isn't it? And it's what? That's about 18 inches.
It's about 2 foot long.
I've got 2 questions. One is, why did you want to name the band after this machete?
The metaphor is that the tree canal was used by the indentured laborers from India who came to tend to the land to plant sugarcane, and they would use it to clear the ground. So in a sense, it's a metaphor for clearing the space for new growth, for new ideas, and it's also a weapon to protect yourself because a lot of people keep a tree canal close by in case an intruder would come.
Would have a tree canal.
Every home would have a tree
I
canal.
think so. Yeah. Primarily as a tool, and then by extension, if you need to protect yourself.
This brings me to question 2: is how come you just so happen to be carrying a great big machete cutlass around
No,
with
it's
you?
in the cubby hole there. That's the tool room there where I got. So we would trim the cherry
It's an
tree with
agricultural tool for clearing the ground and chopping the branches.
Trimming the mango trees and things.
Yeah, they're very tiny.
You know, so the tree canal for us was bestowed on us by Steve Wood, you know. So for him, that was like, you know, tree canal is what we need to do. He really was intent on sort of like creating something, you know, that was edgy, literally.
Right now, everybody feeling it. Everybody feeling it. Everybody now.
So to whine, this is a specifically Trinidadian form of dance, which is
Gyration of the waistline in a rhythmic way.
it's usually with a man behind a woman.
Yeah. I mean, to somebody from another culture, whining is quite a phenomenon to behold.
You just think the first time you see it, you think, how on earth are they getting away with that in public?
Yes, yes, you do. A contemporary reference, and most people would be Rihanna's work. She uses the wine to tremendous effect. You know.
Because it's not, whining is not new. I mean, whining is African dance. It's part of our DNA to be able to whine.
Because the Jamaicans and them too, they have a dirty wine too. That is.
Dirty wine?
Dirty, not dirty. Dirty.
What does that mean?
Same thing as dirty, but they would never
It would make
say
you
dirty.
blush and make you
They would never say dirty, they would say dirty wine.
If you spit in the sky, it will fall in your eyes. So nobody cry, just try your best. Feeling the stress when you put it to the test. What you gonna do? Just try your best.
That was Wendell Manwaring, Stanton Hughley, and Roger Roberts from the band Canal in 2016. Our time's up for today. Any comments, you can always reach the team on outlook@bbc.com. Thank you for spending your time with us today. I'm Emily Webb. Bye for now.
Hi, you're listening to the BBC World Service. It's time for Witness History with me, Lucy Burns. And today, we're off to the circus.
It's a snowy winter night on the hills of Lenin. But even though the temperature is well below freezing, thousands of people have been flocking to this part of Moscow. Because this building, home of one of the world's greatest circuses, the Moscow Order of Lenin State Circus. And though it's open 6 days a week all the year round, with 3 performances on Sundays, you wouldn't stand much chance of a seat unless you booked well in advance.
The Moscow State Circus on Vernatsky Avenue in southwest Moscow is still the world's biggest indoor circus building today. And when it opened in April 1971, it dazzled the crowds in communist Russia.
Inside, the dome rises 80 feet over the ring in this, the so-called new circus. In fact, there are 2 circus buildings in Moscow. The other, older one, could no longer cope with the popular demand. And so this one, surely the most lavishly equipped circus anywhere, was opened in 1971. It seats over 3,000 people, and only the most accomplished Soviet artists are invited to perform here.
Alexander Egorenko was one of the backstage crew in the new building.
When I first started at the circus, the building itself wasn't quite finished, so when I first entered the auditorium, they were still fixing the lights and putting the finishing touches to it. And it was just like this huge stadium. It was absolutely enormous. I couldn't understand how we'd be able to work in such a huge space.
Alexander's father was a ringmaster, the MC who announces the acts and leads the show. So Alexander had grown up watching him perform.
So I didn't have any doubts about what my future profession should be. I knew that circus was my thing. I started at the State Circus College when I was 10, and we were taught the whole range of circus skills: acrobatics, juggling, gymnastics, and tightrope walking. I was best at juggling.
Since it was nationalized by Lenin in 1919, circus has been considered officially as the cultural and artistic equal of opera and ballet, and if anything, it's even more popular amongst adults every bit as much as children. And its appeal seems to be equally wide amongst all walks of life and the many races which make up this vast nation. There are well over 100 circuses throughout the Soviet Union, and recent estimates claim that audiences are numbering a staggering 50 million a year.
From the circus school, Alexander went to do military service, juggling again, this time with the Soviet Army's circus troupe. And in 1971, when the new circus building opened on Vernatsky Avenue, his father became ringmaster there, and Alexander went to work there too, as an auxiliary, working in the props department and helping out with the clowns.
And in a nation where the Moscow Circus School provides rigorous 4-year courses, and where the artists themselves are accorded the status of film stars, we can be sure of seeing the very best of world circus. Good evening, comrade artists. The ringmaster calls up the dressing rooms to say that the show is about to begin. And in the auditorium, the seats are all full, and the conversation dies away.
So the opening performance for the public was called The Lights of the New Circus, and it opened on the 30th of April 1971. But the very first performance was actually on the 4th of April, and this was for the builders who constructed the circus and their families. It was a special performance to show all the different things the circus could do. I still have the program for that performance.
The shows were spectacular, combining incredible feats of acrobatics, trapeze artists and tightrope walkers with clowns and performing animals.
The performances were almost always sold out. It was a real art for the people. People came to see not just the performance, but also the building itself. And they left looking extremely pleased.
The new building was state-of-the-art.
Another new thing was that there were 5 different types of flooring. So one of them was for horses, which was covered in a special kind of grass cover. And there was another floor for illusions with trapdoors. We also had an ice rink floor for doing numbers on ice, and one which was a swimming pool 3 meters deep. And finally, the 5th type of flooring was lights, which meant we could play with various types of illumination during performances. And in order to change between, let's say, the equestrian and the lights flooring, it takes only 4.5 minutes. So even now it seems quite high-tech. And in 1971 it was like it was from the world of fantasy. My favourites were the jugglers. There was one number called Juggling on a Horse, and he'd even sing while he did it.
Acts featuring live animals, not just horses, but lions, elephants and bears too, were a key part of the show.
And horses, of course, are normally terrified of bears, and it took the Chepyakovis 8 years of hard work and experiment to prepare this remarkable act.
Most circuses in the West have stopped using animals in their performances over concerns about animal cruelty. But at the Moscow State Circus, they're still a popular part of the program today. Last year, a circus worker was mauled to death by one of the performing bears. Although Alexander says that otherwise, they work hard to make sure the shows are safe.
When we start working on a new program, I look after the technical side of each number. So I look after the props and safety equipment. Safety is one of my main responsibilities. Thankfully, we haven't had big accidents on stage, although there have been small ones, like, for example, an acrobat twisting their ankle. We prepare these numbers for years. It's not like you just turn up at the circus and start doing the act. It takes years, a very, very long time to practice each number.
All performers in the State Circus are Soviet citizens, by the way. They are, after all, regarded as valuable ambassadors of culture, not only at home, but abroad.
The Moscow State Circus toured all over the world, a rare opportunity for travel outside the Soviet Union. They were an important part of the image the Soviet government wanted to project to the world. But Alexander Egorenko says they didn't feel any political pressure. He says even the clowns were allowed to make jokes about whatever they liked.
No, there were no controls, then or now. The main purpose of the clown is to make you laugh, so we knew that there were no restrictions.
After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, many performers left for better paid jobs at circuses in the West, joining groups like Cirque du Soleil. Alexander kept working at the Moscow State Circus, where he says the shows kept evolving.
The technology became more advanced, so we had much better lighting, for example, and much better sound technology available to us in the 1990s, and our costumes became much more sophisticated. In the old days, when we started, performances were more like a collection of different numbers, acrobats, animals, and so on, and the clowns in the spaces in between. But today, our performances are themed, and it's a real show with incredible innovation, with incredible technological advancement, with very advanced costumes and production.
Various different acts are still touring in different parts of the world under the name of the Moscow State Circus. Alexander is still working in the original building today. Now he's in charge of the ring attendants.
I've been in the circus for 50 years. I spent my whole life in the circus. I've grown old in this circus. But the circus itself is becoming younger and younger.
Alexander Egorenko was speaking to me, Lucy Burns, about his memories of the Moscow State Circus for Witness History of the BBC World Service.
This is BBC World Service, and here's Winifred Robinson to tell you about a new series, Coronavirus Frontline.
We're following a vaccine trial at one of the UK's 5 clinical trial centres.
Welcome to Team Bradford. Thank you for volunteering.
You'll hear from the doctors and the volunteers.
I trust science, I trust the process.
Coronavirus Frontline, the search for a vaccine. Today at 20 GMT. And in 30 minutes, we're in the studio.
We meet one of the world's foremost lighting designers, Patrick Woodruff, OBE, as he rehearses with rock and pop superstars Genesis, illuminating the stage for their latest arena shows on this year's much anticipated The Last Domino Tour.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
It's 13 hours GMT. I'm Jackie Leonard. This is the newsroom from the BBC World Service. More than 200 protesters have been arrested in Moscow as a court decides whether to convert a suspended sentence given to the Russian dissident Alexei Navalny into an actual prison term.
This is total lawlessness, lawless actions of the authorities. Such a high-profile person could be arrested in a live television broadcast without a reason.
A day after the military coup in Myanmar, calls for the release of the pro-democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi and concerns for the future.
The people are very worried for the future of the country and how this military coup will descend into the darkness in many ages to come.
A UN report says cases of child trafficking have tripled in the past 15 years. And we'll hear from Australia, where strong winds have been fanning bushfires to the east of the city of Perth. Those stories here on the newsroom from the BBC World Service in London.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. Russian police have detained more than 200 people near a court in Moscow that's considering whether to jail President Putin's foremost critic, Alexei Navalny. The mass protests his supporters call for have not yet materialized. Prosecutors want Mr. Navalny to serve a 3.5-year sentence that was suspended in 2014. He's accused of failing to meet his parole requirements despite being poisoned last year and flown to Berlin for treatment. Our correspondent, Sarah Rainsford, is outside the court.
There's been a lot of back and forth, of course, with the judge hearing this case, and Alexei Navalny demanding to know how on earth he was supposed to inform the prison authorities of his whereabouts when he was in a coma in Germany. Also to the claim that the authorities here, the prison authorities, didn't know where he was during his probation period. He said, Vladimir Putin let me go to Germany when he was in a coma, so how on earth can you say you don't know where I was?
The army in Myanmar has started releasing politicians who are detained in their capital, Naypyidaw, following a military coup. It's not clear if Aung San Suu Kyi is among them. About 400 of them were being held in guest houses where they checked in ahead of what was supposed to be the opening of Parliament on Monday. One of Israel's biggest health providers says early data from the country's coronavirus inoculation program shows very high vaccine effectiveness. Tom Bateman has more details.
A fifth of Israelis have now had 2 vaccine doses. Dr. Anat Eka-Zohar, the lead data scientist at Maccabi, one of Israel's big health funds, told the BBC they found that of 248,000 people vaccinated, only 66 tested positive for the virus more than a week after their second dose. Compared to case numbers in an unvaccinated group, this suggested the jab was 92% effective, said Dr. Eka-Zohar, describing this as very good news.
The head of the world's largest vaccine manufacturer, India's Serum Institute, has offered to provide coronavirus vaccines to the European Union, where production shortfalls have caused supply cuts. Stephanie Hegarty reports.
The Serum Institute of India is producing 2.4 million doses of the vaccine every day. CEO Adar Poonawalla has told the BBC that his company is willing and has the capacity to supply to Europe, but is held back by regulation. He's calling for more coordination of regulation around the world to speed up vaccine supply. Most of the vaccines produced by the Serum Institute are already being rolled out across India and to some of its neighbours.
Tanzania's health minister says the government has no plans to import any coronavirus vaccines at a time when there are fears that infections are rising. President John Magufuli has cast doubt on the effectiveness of jabs. World news from the BBC. The United Nations says the rate of child trafficking has tripled over the past 15 years. The findings are in a study by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. From Vienna is Bethany Bell.
The UNODC report said girls are mainly trafficked for sexual exploitation and boys for forced labour. It said that in 2018 around 50,000 victims of human trafficking were reported in 148 countries. But the actual number was likely to have been much higher. The executive director of the UNODC, Ghada Wali, said the coronavirus pandemic, with millions of people out of work and children out of school, raised the risk of human trafficking. She called for targeted action against traffickers who exploit the vulnerable.
Pakistan's Supreme Court has ordered the release from prison of 4 men who were recently acquitted of the kidnapping and murder of the American journalist Daniel Pearl in 2002. Judges said the men should be moved to a government rest house where their freedom will be restricted. The Supreme Court decision last week to overturn the men's original convictions on the basis of insufficient evidence sparked outrage in the United States. Serbia says it's not happy with the decision to establish diplomatic relations between Kosovo, a former Serbian province, and Israel. Serbia's foreign minister said this would undoubtedly influence his country's relationship with Israel. Kosovo is the latest in a series of Muslim-majority states to normalize ties with Israel in recent months. The European Commission has strongly condemned threats against port officials in Northern Ireland, which aid freight to and from the British mainland. Its chief spokesman said the safety of staff was the top priority. He insisted that the employees were simply implementing the Brexit agreement. BBC News.
Hello, I'm Jackie Leonard and you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. It is officially a court case about embezzlement and the question whether a suspended sentence should become a custodial one. But with a massive deployment of riot police, the court appearance by the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny seems to be rather more important than that. He was detained on his arrival back in Moscow from Berlin, where he'd been treated after being the victim of a nerve agent attack, an incident in which the Kremlin has denied any involvement. Mass protests followed his arrest. This supporter, Andrei, joined the small crowd gathered outside the court.
Одним словом, беспредел. Беспредел со стороны, конечно, власти.
This is total lawlessness, lawless actions of the authorities. The problem is, even such a high-profile person can be arrested in a live television broadcast without a reason. It means that people like you and I, unknown people, they can do whatever they want to us. This is the problem, one of the big problems.
Our correspondent Sarah Rainsford is there, and I asked her what's going on in court.
Well, there's a break just been called in the proceedings inside the courthouse where Alexei Navalny has been appearing in a glass cage, nicknamed an aquarium here. He was brought in handcuffed. You know, the court proceedings have been underway for a while, And basically the prison service has been arguing that he violated the terms of his probation, his suspended sentence, because he hadn't been checking in with the prison service as he was supposed to. Now, Mr. Navalny and his lawyers have been saying, are you aware that I was actually in a coma, so there's no way for me to check in? He also, Mr. Navalny, was telling the court that Vladimir Putin knew exactly where he was, because it was Mr. Putin who gave the approval for him to be medevaced out to Germany when he was in a coma after his poisoning. So he said, how come the prison authorities didn't know where I was if President Putin knew? So a pretty vigorous defence being mounted by Mr. Navalny and his defence team, his lawyers, but the prison authorities insisting that they want his 3.5-year suspended sentence converted into a custodial sentence. They want him sent to jail.
Generally, how much support has he got, and how worried are the authorities about him?
Well, we've seen some of the support for Mr. Navalny over the past 2 weeks, haven't we? We've seen big crowds, big protests right across the country, unprecedented in terms of their spread. You know, dozens and dozens of towns and cities in normally politically passive parts of Russia, where people were taking to the streets and calling for Mr. Navalny's release. Now, that doesn't mean that the whole country supports him, of course, and it doesn't mean that plenty of people don't support Vladimir Putin. But Alexei Navalny has made a big impact, particularly via YouTube and social media over the past few years. He's also got a network of offices right across the country. He has activists, young people working for him in all sorts of places. So he is an influential character, even within the unfree political society that Russia is. On the other hand, you know, look at the reaction of the Kremlin. Look at where he is today. This is a case. This, you know, the argument is about a court case which the European court said was manifestly unreasonable and was an arbitrary sentence against him in the first place. And now the attempt is having him serve a suspended sentence. They're trying to send him to jail. So if the Kremlin's not worried about him, why am I looking at dozens and dozens and dozens of riot police? And why is Mr. Navalny up in court again?
That was Sarah Rainsford in Moscow. To Myanmar now, where after Monday's coup, the country is not only becoming politically isolated, but physically isolated too. The army, which is now running the country, appears to have shut the airspace. Local reports say international flights have been banned until at least May. Yesterday's military takeover upended the rule of law in Myanmar and brought the country's fledgling democratic system to a juddering halt. Some of the politicians who were detained yesterday are being released. This campaigner, who didn't want to be identified, spoke of a darkness descending over his country.
The people are very worried for the future of the country and how this military coup will descend into the darkness in many ages to come. And that is the worrying faces of the people on the street and on the tea shop, and like people are discussing about this. The military also tightened the security around the city of Rangoon.
Despite increased security, life has returned to some degree of normality. Banks have reopened and communications have been re-established, although the streets are much quieter. So what is happening to Aung San Suu Kyi and her colleagues now? A question for our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head.
Well, we've been told nothing specific. I'm sure she's okay. One report that suggests, and I think it's quite likely, that she's being held in her house in Naypyidaw. She has a home there. The other members of her party, particularly legislators, are being held in a complex of government buildings, which some of them have described as being a bit like an open detention centre. People who would have been sitting in Parliament to inaugurate her second term of office this week. There's a lot of people still being held by the military. A few have been released. I would expect at some stage over the next few days they will release them. But big questions hang over what happens to Aung San Suu Kyi. I've no doubt she'll be absolutely furious about what the military has done. And she remains enormously popular. She has a very strong electoral mandate from last November's election. The military contests that election, but her party won 80% of the seats in Parliament. It was a resounding victory. So I can't imagine that she's willing at this stage to cooperate much with the military, and I don't think they'll be very keen for her to go out and start giving messages of defiance to her supporters. For the moment, there's been relatively little response inside Myanmar to the coup. Mostly people, I think, are still in a state of shock.
So what are you actually hearing about how much normal life is continuing and about communications and security and so on?
Mostly communications have been restored. There's a lot of military visible in Naypyidaw. That is the crucial city. That's where all the politicians are being held and where the military has its strongest base as well. Politics has been completely frozen. A parliament session that was supposed to happen won't. The military is talking about changing the election commission, which had refused to recognise its complaints about irregularities. In terms of politics, everything has changed, but in terms of normal life in the commercial capital, Yangon, it's pretty much back to normal now. I think people are simply sitting and waiting to see what impact this change is going to have. I'm sure a lot of people are angry. I mean, people came out to cast their votes in very large numbers, mostly for Aung San Suu Kyi's party last November, but I don't think we're seeing much more response than that at the moment. And remember, people have got a lot of other things on their minds too. The COVID pandemic has hit Myanmar hard. The economy is really suffering. There are other things that people need to think about.
There's been an awful lot of international condemnation. We've heard the threat of sanctions from the US. The UN Security Council is going to be talking about what's been going on in Myanmar later today. How much pressure do you think the military leadership will be feeling from all this?
Not much. I mean, it's not the first time they've faced sanctions, and the last time there were significant sanctions more than 2 decades ago when the military ran the country. They proved to be largely counterproductive. They hurt the ordinary economy, but the military, with their privileged companies mostly doing business with China, were fine. I think any talk about sanctions at this stage is largely talk. Mostly the US, if it does apply sanctions, would try to apply targeted sanctions. Sanctions that target top military officers involved in the coup and their businesses. But they're already doing that over the atrocities against the Rohingyas. The man who led the coup, General Min Aung Hlaing, is an international pariah. He's a man who's been accused by the UN of genocide and has been heavily sanctioned by the US. So what we don't know is there anything more the US can do against these senior military figures that they haven't done already? And apart from that, I think for all the talk of sanctions, nobody really believes that's going to make a great deal of difference to the generals on the ground.
That was Jonathan Head. The high-profile murder in Pakistan in 2002 of the American journalist Daniel Pearl sparked international condemnation. Now the country's Supreme Court has ordered 4 men acquitted of the attack to be moved from jail to a government rest house. The US government had reacted angrily to the court's decision last week to overturn the men's original conviction. Sikandar Kamani reports from Islamabad.
Pakistani officials have been racing to try and keep these 4 men in detention of some sort or the other. The alleged ringleader of the plot to abduct Daniel Pearl, Omar Sheikh, a British Pakistani man, and 3 alleged accomplices were all cleared of any wrongdoing last week by Pakistan's highest court. They had originally been convicted back in 2002. The men will now be held at a government guest house, where they will be kept under tight security, but their families will be able to visit them. Pakistani authorities are attempting to have the verdict acquitting them overturned. Last week, the United States said it was outraged by the court's decision.
That was Sikandar Kamani. This is the BBC World Service, and Jerry has the headlines.
More than 200 protesters have been arrested in Moscow as a court decides whether the Russian dissident Alexei Navalny should serve a prison sentence. Myanmar's military rulers have begun releasing politicians who were held following a coup on Monday. And a UN report says cases of child trafficking have tripled in the past 15 years.
Yes, UN officials say there were more than 50,000 victims of child trafficking in the year 2018. Our correspondent Bethany Bell joins us now. So, Bethany, who is it who's being affected?
Well, this report says criminals are trafficking children from very, very poor households, from dysfunctional families, and those who've been abandoned. It says around half of the detected victims are being trafficked for sexual exploitation, and around 38% for forced labour, and about 6% are being forced into criminal activities. In terms of child labour, it says that this is a problem that's very much seen more in low-income countries. And in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, children are being trafficked to work on plantations, in mines and quarries, and also as vendors in market. And in South Asia, there are children as young as 12 who have been forced to work in the garment industry. So this is something that they say is a worldwide pattern. In wealthier countries, you're more likely to see children being trafficked for sexual exploitation.
And how big is the impact of coronavirus restrictions?
Well, there are a lot of fears about this. I mean, this is a report with data dating back to 2018, but in the introduction to the report, the head of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime said they were very concerned about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, with millions of people out of work, with children not in school, that this could have a very, very significant impact and raise the risk of child trafficking all the more. And they called on governments to really try and have targeted action against trafficking.
Bethany, thank you. That was Bethany Bell speaking to us from Vienna. Scientists from the World Health Organization are continuing their fact-finding trip to Wuhan, the Chinese city where the coronavirus was first detected. They've already been to markets and centres for disease control under strict guidance. Our correspondent in China is Stephen McDonnell, and I asked him what the WHO team was hoping to achieve, and were they happy with the access and the information they've been given.
What they're really doing is just looking at what Chinese scientists have already done. So they're not actually doing their own hands-on research. When they went to that market, they weren't taking out little bags and scraping samples off surfaces, or they're not going to bat caves to capture bats and sample the animals. It's more that they're looking at what have Chinese scientists have done. Perhaps they could crunch the numbers in a different way. At the end of these 2 weeks, they're not going to say, ta-da, we found the origins of the coronavirus. It's just not possible. They think it could take a long time, maybe even years, to get to the bottom of it. Now, the question of whether or not they're getting the access they need is a very good one, because they haven't been available to speak to us, partly because of the health restrictions placed on them. So we've been calling out questions across the road and the like to try and glean some sort of response from them. I mean, at one point, when they came out of that market, I was shouting out to them, "We're happy with the visit to the market. Are you getting enough access?" And we sort of had, at one point, thumbs up, and then another point from them, thumbs down. So at least some aspect of it they're not happy with, it seems. It's being run by their host, the Chinese government. You would hope they get to do what they want to do, but it's certainly a very controlled visit, I'll put it to you that way.
That was Stephen McDonnell. Dozens of homes have been damaged or destroyed after a bushfire to the east of Perth in Western Australia. Strong winds fanned the flames overnight, with emergency services saying that for people living in some areas it was now too dangerous to leave. Our Australia correspondent Shaima Khalil reports.
Heavy smoke has been reported in the northern suburbs of Perth. Aerial footage has shown several properties destroyed, with some still smouldering. The bushfire was reported at midday on Monday, but with strong winds fanning it, the blaze has moved at a significant speed overnight. One firefighter was taken to hospital for smoke inhalation. The area is currently in a